Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this presentation this afternoon on connecting reproductive and mental health. My name is Lindy Meyer, and I am a fertility care practitioner for the Salina Diocese. I'm also the Natural Family Planning Coordinator for our diocese, and I live in Concordia. Been married for almost 28 years, and we have been blessed with 7 children and our first grandchild just a few months ago. So I'm excited to go through this conversation with Catherine Danuzzo this afternoon, and I'm going to just let Catherine take a moment to introduce herself to you.
So my name is Catherine Danuzzo, and I am a licensed professional counselor who runs a private practice all through a Catholic perspective. I have been counseling for many years. That's why you can see all the gray hair. So I've been there for a while. And I live in Beloit. I have 4 children, and my practice and my passion is helping people to understand their mental health through the Catholic lens. And I'm just so excited that Lindy sees the value in our mental health and the intentionality, and so excited to be here to help and support in any way I can.
Thank you, Catherine, for being here with me today and doing this. This presentation is part of our Diocesan Center's celebration of Worldwide Fertility Care Week. And it's just a week to really celebrate the many different applications of the Creighton Model Fertility Care System and NAPRO technology that connects with that. And this week, we're kind of diving into some of the more sensitive issues that aren't as often talked about. So earlier this week on Sunday afternoon, we had a talk on postpartum depression. We have this current talk, and then this evening, we're also going to have a presentation on infant loss and miscarriage. Going to talk about some practical things, but also spiritual support. Real quick, before we get into the issues, I just want to kind of let everyone know, as a fertility care center, we have 9 practitioners in our diocese. We have, I'm going to start in the western part. We have Kathy Eftink in Goodland, and then we have 3 practitioners in Colby. That would be Pamela Schrader, Brianna McLemore, and Tina Schrick. And then in Ellis, we have Samantha Baker. In Salina Maria Rapp. In Aurora is Megan Lyon. I'm in Concordia, and then we have Lori Harlan in Manhattan. So a lot of great resources across the diocese for anyone looking to learn more about how their body is working for any reason. We're always happy to help. So here we go. We're going to dig into this important connection. There truly is a connection between our reproductive and our mental health. So I just want to begin by saying that, from a Creighton model perspective, we know that there are 4 key hormones that come and go throughout a woman's menstrual cycle, and they each have their own pattern and their own timing. And I often will say they kind of are each like their own roller coaster, and they ebb and flow throughout the month for women. Those 4 hormones are the follicle stimulating hormone, estrogen, luteinizing hormone, and progesterone. So they do important things for our reproductive system, help us ovulate, help us prepare for pregnancy. So they're doing some very important physical things, but they also impact our mood, our energy level, our mental focus, all those things. And so, as practitioners, we can see how those impact women. But Catherine, from a mental health perspective, what role do they play in your work that you do as a counselor? And maybe not just those 4 hormones, but hormones in general.
Yeah, and I think as you were talking, Lindy, I have to get on a soapbox for just a second. Thinking about changing the viewpoint of how we view fertility is what you're doing. And I'm working on changing how we view mental health. So when we think about fertility awareness, most people are coming here today thinking, okay, I go to this practitioner because there's a problem. I don't go to counseling because I have a problem. Like there's something bad about this roller coaster of hormones, or the way my body is bad. And one thing I've always loved about fertility awareness, and when you really get into the Creighton model, is that it's about your body is beautiful. God created goodness, right? Yes, those hormones affect us, but they're for a good reason, because God wants us to have babies, and He wants us to, procreate, and they're good, and our bodies are good, and our mental health is good. So do I deal with these hormones on a regular basis with my clients? Absolutely. Is one of my first questions that shock them is I'm like, You're having a really hard day. Where are you in your cycle?
Mhm.
Can we understand that better of where we are? But I really want to start this off by saying that this is a proactive, beautiful, let's understand what is good about us. Then this roller coaster is bad. I just need to get off of it. It's, if I understand this, I can maybe enjoy this more, and I can see the beauty in what God has created in me with these hormone fluctuations and why they are what they are. And it's really positive, but we have to change that narrative to see that.
Great. I love that. And, Catherine, I love that, like, together we can change the perspective on two very misunderstood issues. And, the Creighton model system really even takes that awareness another step, and is a model that really focuses on fertility appreciation, that we can really see that it is a beautiful gift, right? As who we are as women and as men as well. So I thank you for kind of pointing out that perspective. As practitioners, one of the things that are very common that we work with women and can kind of observe in their chart is something you already alluded to when you ask women, where are you in your cycle? And usually they're in a post-ovulatory phase, and they're kind of right before the period, they're leading up to that time, and they're experiencing some PMS or premenstrual syndrome. Those symptoms can include crying easily, depression, anxiety, irritability. Sometimes women that have really bad PMS can even have suicidal thoughts. And then there's a host of other physical things, not just the mental. But from our perspective, a lot of times that is due to low progesterone. Her body is either dropping off that progesterone level too soon, or it never made enough to begin with. So that's kind of what we see, and we certainly refer women then to their doctor to evaluate that hormone deficiency, that possibility. But what are some tricks, some tools, and some things that women could do to kind of help themselves out during this time in their cycle?
And that's a great question. And most of my answers are going to start with this, which is, don't bully yourself. Don't be mad at yourself that this is the case. I keep thinking about this moment when I was talking to a man one day, and he was talking about his children, and he has daughters, and he's like, I really thought that, like, I would teach my kids to, like, manage their emotions. And this was after one of his daughters was, like, really upset and crying. And he was telling me, like, I don't understand why she's so upset. And I'm like, well, she's probably, like, somewhere in her cycle, and that would make sense. And it was very much like, well, you should be able to fix that. Like, she should understand. And I challenged and I said, wait, if we're going to believe that a woman's body is beautiful and that her fertility is beautiful, then these hormone fluctuations are also beautiful. So as we go into this, instead of being like, oh, I'm so bad, like, I'm sad, my stupid progesterone is low, like, what's wrong? We can go into it being like, hey, look, a period is going to be starting. Most likely, I'm not going to be feeling well. What are some things that I can intentionally do to get a little extra rest, drink a little extra water, have that date with your girlfriend, being intentional of the things that, like, give you joy or kind of like help release some of that serotonin, maybe go on a walk. I remember my volleyball coach in high school, I'd be like, oh, I'm having PMS, I need to miss practice. And she's like, nope, you need to go to practice. Exercising is actually going to make you feel better, right? And so when we have this intentionality, and also this intentionality with our spouse, which is really important. If our husbands can listen and say, oh, you're going to have a hard time these days, and maybe I'll put the kids to bed, or maybe I'll wash the dishes today. This will enable them to see it as a beautiful gift of, like, this is part of your fertility that leads to children, and it's good. So being intentional to know, what do you need to fill that love tank for you, and giving yourself permission to do those things.
Catherine, yesterday, I talked with a group of high school girls about their cycles and their fertility. And we talked a little bit about this and how, kind of understanding the coming and going of these hormones. They are a beautiful thing. And how to kind of embrace that and use it to your advantage. And so, but also not to set yourself up for failure. So if you know that you're in this post-ovulatory phase when your body kind of wants to retreat and rest, it's not a good time to plan something big and new. Like, let's not decide to start training for a marathon today, or let's not, in the class, someone said it's not time to plan prom, but at the same time, we can't have the rest of the world sink around our cycles, right? Unfortunately. So we might have a big test or a big assignment due, or, something big in life for us adults. And so it's important that we kind of give ourselves these moments to kind of retreat during that time when we still have to be busy and we have to function, but yet plan in those different times to retreat from that. But another thing that I just thought of as you were talking, and it was actually part of our discussion with the students yesterday, was sometimes PMS, is joked about, kind of poked fun at, or, if a woman is irritable, a man might say, oh, you're probably about to start your period, aren't you? And they make jokes, and that can be very hurtful. It can be very frustrating. Could you just speak to that a little bit? Maybe some kind of understanding between couples or just people in general?
Absolutely. And I think the first conversation is what I had said at the beginning, is like, we need to be teaching our men and our boys that these parts of fertility are beautiful. They are not a joke. They are part of the cycle that leads to fertility. So I always challenge, if you're pro-life, if you truly are pro-life, then you're pro the cycle and you're supporting within that cycle. So that just narrative has to be changed. But I also think you alluded to this very well, is my favorite word, which is intentionality. When I know my cycle, I'm able to look ahead and tell my husband, like, hey, the next couple of days are hard. Like, let's not have any big conversations. Let's not try to decide the new budget on this day, right? Because I'm probably going to be more sensitive. But I can also look at my phase 2, where I'm going to have lots of energy and I'm going to be more amorous, and I'm going to, like, maybe that's a great time for us to have some of those harder conversations. And I can just be more intentional, but saying, like, I'm not saying that, it's okay for me to be upset with you, like, for no reason, or to have these emotions, but I can say that I can give myself grace in them, and I can have intentionality in, when we have those hard conversations, or when is it important to have a date night, or when can I have that, for that girl, like, maybe I want to have a movie night with my girls that day, like, I can feel I'm going to be down and I just want to watch like some chick flicks and enjoy myself. If we understand our cycle and the role and how they're going to impact our emotions, we can have intentional conversations that make it less bumpy. I always say, like, it adds shock absorbers to the challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as practitioners, oftentimes we work with women and couples that are struggling with miscarriage and infertility. And there are so many emotions in that. Obviously for those that lose a child, there's so much grief. But in both aspects, whether it's miscarriage or infertility, and you can't get pregnant, there's so much sadness, there's frustration, disappointment, sense of failure. There can be a lot of anxiety about getting pregnant, and kind of pressure for every act of intimacy to have this, desired result. Depression is common, in strife within the marriage because of all the struggle. Give me some good advice that you have for these couples as they go through this difficult journey in their life.
And first, I just want to acknowledge how real the struggle is. And I think that that's something that's very hard with infertility, is that it is one of those things that is still very much not talked about. And there is a feeling of failure. Like, I work with a number of women who are struggling with infertility, and it feels like, I failed this month. Like, I didn't get pregnant, I failed. Then, being able to challenge all the different pieces and the faith components. And so being able to first, like, acknowledge that this is something that you don't have to go through alone. I highly recommend either having a good supportive group or a counselor to help you through infertility, because it is challenging. And I think that that's the first step, is that we always want to think, the beginning of the cycle is like, oh, I'm ready, I'm excited, we're going to try. And then there's the waiting, the dreaded 10 days as we wait to test, and then the emotion about hopeful testing and then not being pregnant, or all of those emotions. It truly is a roller coaster. So the first thing I do with a client when they come to me is I say, first, you have to accept that if, you have the cross of infertility, that it is going to be a roller coaster. Like, let's look and see like how this is going to be challenging. And then I say, let's find the food for the journey, which is, what are the different ways that we can find support in our practitioners, in our doctors, in our spouses, in our counselors, and our friends to help us on that roller coaster. Again, infertility and loss of a child in miscarriage are never going to be easy. There's never a moment when someone says, oh, well, I feel better about this now. Like, it's always going to be hard. And so once you accept that and you realize like, okay, I need support to get through this challenge, and you allow that support in. And so it's like having those conversations, vetting the people, because not everyone knows what to say, right? So having intentionality of, maybe I don't just say it to anyone, but I talk to my friend who also has had infertility. Really, husbands, very rarely do they get the resources they need after a miscarriage. Like talking to other men who have gone through a miscarriage and their loss of their child, and supporting their wife, and they feel helpless. And so I think it's about being intentional that this is a challenge. It can be a long challenge. Like, it's not something that, you can just pull yourself up from your bootstraps once. And making sure you're creating what I call a net, which is a lot of strings that can support you in different ways through the different elements of the infertility. Because so often we're like, oh, it should just be my husband. My husband can be all my support. And I'm sorry, ladies, they're amazing, but they cannot be your full support. You need a net of various women, possibly your family, counseling, husband, to help you through this, because it is hard.
That's so important. And I think, kind of a beautiful thing even about this discussion today that I was thinking about is, as practitioners, we develop a referral list, because we might have the postpartum mom that's struggling with breastfeeding. That's not the hat we're wearing, but we need to be able, it might come up in our follow-up, and we want to, refer her to someone to help with that. But these issues that we're talking about today, certainly we can send them to their doctor to talk about the underlying hormonal or biological things that might be a factor. In the meantime, the mental health professional can certainly help them through, maybe the worst time, but it may be a lifelong thing. Sometimes we can fix it with medication or, procedures, but it might also be a struggle that they're going to have to some degree always. And so it's a beautiful networking of professionals that do recognize, like you said, we're pro-life. We're recognizing the dignity of the human person in all aspects, the whole person, the body and the soul. And so we have the professional network that is so important to build and have for people, but then also that personal network of support. And I think, so many of these things we keep to ourselves, and we struggle through them alone, and we never speak to them. So we're not helping ourselves, but also there's such beauty in being willing to share that with others and be a source of support for them. But I think it's also important, and maybe if you could speak to this just for a moment, we kind of have to know when we have healed enough to be a source of support for someone else. Sometimes people want to, oh, I've been through this, let me help someone, but they're actually not quite that place in the journey yet. Could you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, and this is probably coming from a counselor's perspective, where I feel like most people who try to help tend to make it worse than better. Because there is a professional, like, you don't go to, your friend and ask them to do cancer surgery on you. But I think we do that emotionally a lot. Like, well, I should just be able to leave this with a friend and they should be able to fix. So what I always try to say is, your job as a support net is to support, to listen, to validate. Because Lindy, you are so right. We keep it all in our heads. And when thoughts are in my head, they're just true. I will never get pregnant. It's all my fault. If I hadn't done this, if I had done that, all these things just stick in my head and they're just true. And when I can say them out to someone and they can say, they can love me in that hardship and they can love me in this, and I don't feel alone, is truly the best that our friends and our social network can do. when you go to that next level where you're like, oh, I can fix them, like I can make this better for them, you're kind of going into a level that most situations are pretty complex. And I would be hesitant to feel. So I always tell people, when you're walking with someone, you're exactly where you need to be. When you start carrying them, they probably need to go to a professional. And what I challenge the ladies is that my clients with infertility, with really most of my clients, but especially with infertility and losses, they feel like there's something wrong with them if they go to counseling. Like, I'm not doing this well, or I'm not, holy enough, or I'm not, faithful enough, and there's something wrong with me. And I want to speak to all the ladies right now and say, no, there's nothing wrong with you, but it is a heavy burden you shouldn't have to carry alone. Like, more than anything, is I'm helping support and help you work through that. It's not because there's anything wrong with you. And so to realize that this is a hard journey, mental health is a hard journey, and it's okay to get help, to help you walk through this life that's very challenging.
Kind of to turn a 180 here and go the opposite direction. The Creighton Model Fertility Care System is a method of family planning. And so, we all go through different seasons in our life, and sometimes we're hoping to get pregnant, but there are other times when we have a serious reason to avoid a pregnancy for whatever reason it might be. It could be a physical condition, finances, it could be emotional and our own mental well-being. Maybe we just need a space between babies a little bit. But sometimes we are working with couples that truly have a very serious reason to avoid a pregnancy. And there can be a lot of anxiety over the possibility of getting pregnant. So they want to, protect the dignity of their body. They don't want to use artificial hormones. They want to follow God's plan for marriage. And so they want to do this in a natural way, but it can create a lot of stress and anxiety and worry over, is this really going to happen? And, kind of a fear, like having intercourse with your husband or your wife can be a fearful thing, because if this pregnancy happens, how would this change? So what would you recommend for couples that need to kind of find some balance there between, trusting the system, trusting God, but yet taking seriously their need to avoid a pregnancy?
Yeah. And so that's a very complex question. But if I was to simplify it for today's meeting, is that I really, if a client came to me in this, the first steps that we would do is, kind of confirm that faith piece, like that God will help you with like I always say, we can do these things, but we have to give that 10% to God, like, or that 1% to God. Like, if this happens, like, I do have this challenge of faith that, like, God will help me through it, but let's focus on the 99 that we can do. Right. And so we would first kind of start on that, like, what are the statistics, with Creighton? There's how risky do you want to be? Like, where are you fitting in that? And, like, working with the couple to determine that, where they are, like, working with communication to be confident and feel supported in the decision that they made for how they're going to use their charts. Like, again, with prayer and all of that, but I think the couple communication, making sure that they're on the same page. And then normally that comes in working with also, like, a lot of times there are things in a woman's life that just feels overwhelming. And so we'll start talking about, like, what part of this makes another baby so scary? Is it because of my time? Is it my body? Like, when we do the concrete, do I need to understand my medical better? Do I need to get a babysitter 3 days a week? Or do I need to know, so often our husbands try to help us when we have littles, and they're like, I'm going to put the baby to bed. And the mom's like, that's my cuddle time. Why is Dad doing that? I just wish he'd get up with them so I could sleep in. And so I call it shooting baskets with blindfolds on. Like, they're trying to make a basket, but they don't know their goal. And so a lot of time, to help with some of that anxiety, is more clear communication with my spouse of, like, these are the areas where I feel so overwhelmed, or I feel like I can't handle it, or I feel fear. Like, let's work together to see how we can provide better support, so that, like, that overall fear of just, I can't juggle all of this, is feeling more stable. And then again, as you get more stable in those areas, you can go back to God and being like, okay, God, what are you asking of us? And keep having those conversations. But there's normally some practical pieces of looking at, do they have a good net? Does the woman have a good net? If not, let's kind of work on that. Where's her husband in that net? Is he helpful or is he not? And again, not saying that husbands aren't intentionally helpful. I think sometimes they're trying to be helpful, but they don't know how, and women don't ask. And so there's just a communication issue of like, that kind of helps the conversation be a little, I can now think of it much more practically than I am in just my fear.
You know, as I kind of already mentioned, one of the reasons to do this today is obviously to help women and men and just everyone see that there are many different aspects to fertility care. It's not just about achieving or avoiding pregnancy, it's about our overall health. It's also a great opportunity to connect these two professions, to help everyone see they're not alone in all of these struggles, and to connect with different resources. And so I love the way you're talking about the support systems and everything that are necessary. And the other thing that we kind of tackled this week with the Fertility Care Week are some of the tougher topics and the more sensitive topics to talk about. So as we kind of continue this discussion today, I want to move into some things that are a little bit heavier. And really because people are afraid to talk about them. There can be shame, there can be embarrassment, there can be a lot of pain. And so we tend to kind of shut those things off and not reach out for help. And so I just want to jump into those today so that we can put it out there. One, that there is no shame. Let's talk about it. It's okay. And then, you know, give some people some ideas on the resources and tools that they have to deal with them. So the first thing that I really want to talk about is that, you know, as practitioners, as we're working with either single women or married women, a lot of times, you know, as we're going through a history and getting to know this woman, we'll discover that there's a history of some kind of sexual trauma. And there are just, you know, there's so many things that are involved with that, with emotions. There's so much healing that needs to happen, and it can take years, and it's probably always going to be a lifetime process, right? In intimacy with their spouse can be difficult. Even if they want to have a child, there still can be, you know, great fear and pain in that. And I know, like, this is a huge discussion, right? We could have one of these on this topic alone, but are there any things that you would, you know, just kind of to put out there so that people know what's possible for help?
So, you know, this is a very hard topic, and statistically, they say 1 in 3 people have been sexually abused at some point in their life. So what we have to realize is that you're, 1, not alone. 2, this is not okay. Like, what happened to you was not okay. And 3, you deserve healing. You deserve to get that support and that healing. And so when it comes to helping, the first thing that I always try to do in this situation is to help people understand what happens in our brains when we have a traumatic event, when we have abuse. I wrote a book called The Catholic Guide Through Anxiety, and really it's just it's a biological breakdown to what happens when we have trauma, when we have anxiety, and how our brain processes it. Once you have that knowledge, when we can understand that our brain forever takes a picture of those dangerous areas and they never want to go back to that place again, and that's where we have triggers, like especially when there's been sexual abuse in the past, what happens is that there's a lot of triggers in the intimacy with their spouse, and they're very frustrated. They're kind of mad at themselves. I call them the dreaded shoulds. I shouldn't feel this way. I should want to be with my husband. I should be all of these things. And these dreaded shoulds can really just like beat us up, like we're stoning ourselves, right, with these shoulds. And the first thing I do is challenge, like, no, like it makes sense biologically why your body is afraid of this act again. And so what we first have to do is be kind to our body and to our brain and to love ourselves in that woundedness. So then we can like calm that fear response. And then we can start doing intentional things to kind of desensitize ourselves and help our brains realize that, no, I'm not, it's not the same situation that happened in the past. This isn't the person that hurt me, right? So there normally is a decent amount of work that the woman herself or the male has to do themselves to get to that point. And then what we do is we work with the spouse, and I've worked with many. So those who are like, no, this isn't possible, I'm telling you what I do with my clients who have come to me with these exact concerns. And I've seen them have beautiful, fruitful intimacy with in their marriage and children. And so it is possible, but you do have to take some steps to like work with your spouse to have him better understand your wounds, to understand those triggers, to understand why certain things, give you flashbacks or different problems like that. And then we're able to like through the intimacy, you kind of recreate new images in the brain, we create a new pathway so that we can challenge that and we can communicate. And the main thing with anxiety and those fears is that you don't feel safe, right? Any type of abuse takes away that beautiful childlike idea of safety. Like, I'm just safe wherever I am. When that changes, then everything changes. And then we're much more like on guard for fear and being hurt. That's what our brains do. So what we have to do is retrain the brain that with this person, in this situation, we are safe. It's also possibly working with doulas and various things with the childbirth, because actually childbirth itself can be traumatic for someone who has had sexual trauma. And so to realize that, again, these are systems that there are so many resources in place to help you overcome and to heal from this, but people have to realize that they're worthy of that healing. And I was thinking as we were talking that this might seem overwhelming because we've talked about, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. And I just want to say that if any of this feels like, okay, I feel they're talking to me, going to Lindy, coming to me, reaching to your priest, like, we have resources that will kind of find who you need. Like Lindy said, we have those resources available. And so if at first you're like, I don't even know what my net would be, right? Like, that's why we're doing this. So you can reach out and we can start like getting you to the right people to help support you, because you don't have to carry this alone and you don't have to stay in that woundedness. All Jesus wants is our healing, and he gives us, I call them our little Jesuses around, like walking around trying to help heal.
Catherine, I don't know how you feel, but for me, when someone comes to me and asks, it has that moment of vulnerability to say, I am struggling with this. Do you have someone, that you can refer me to, whether they're coming, from a charting fertility care need, but also to admit that and to trust me enough to ask for that referral. It is one of the most honoring and beautiful things it's just beautiful. I so appreciate that. I feel that God gives, that's a gift that God gives me when someone asks me that. It's just a beautiful moment in loving each other, and having those Jesus moments with each other. So definitely, build that net. You may not know how, but there are people that can help you build that net.
Exactly. And I call them diamonds. This is a diamond that someone's giving you. And, I'm imagining that people listening right now are saying in their heads, like, yeah, but, I told someone once and they weren't. Mm-hmm. They said it wasn't right, or it was my fault, or, and one of the things that we realize is that not everyone is a jeweler. Not everyone knows how to handle your diamond. Right. And so to be very, I feel so honored that when someone shares this with me, I treat it like a precious, this is a precious jewel that I'm going to think that, one, I feel honored you trust me, and two, I'm going to be gentle and make sure it gets to the right place and that it's well taken care of. And to know that there are people here who can do that for you, even if someone in the past didn't, because not everyone knows that it's a diamond.
I love your analogies. I just love them. All right. So kind of moving on to another difficult topic. One of the unique things that we do in a Creighton model follow-up session as we're teaching couples is we teach SPICE, So again, we're body and soul, and our sexuality, our intimacy with our spouse is not just a physical act. SPICE stands for the spiritual, physical, intellectual, creative, and communicative, and then emotional dimensions of our sexuality and who we are. And so we, really work with couples to provide tools in building the relationship in all of those areas. And sometimes in doing that, one of the things that will come to the light is either a past or a current addiction to pornography, whether it's for the man or the woman. We often think that men are the only ones who struggle with pornography, but it's definitely something that women can struggle with as well. Just as a mental health professional, are there any resources to build that net that you have for people?
The first thing I have to say is that this has to be taken out of the shame box, because so often once you're married, everyone thinks that any pornography addiction goes away. That's a struggle that younger people have, oh, once I get married and I can have all the sex I want, then obviously this is going to go away. And that's not how addictions work. And so we have to be able to realize the only way I can have a net is if I'm willing to come and get the support to get that. And so first is having that conversation with your spouse that we probably need to get support systems in there. And then I think SA has a lot of, so Sexaholics Anonymous, just like Alcoholics Anonymous, they use a 12-step process. And there's a lot of different ones throughout the country. There's virtual ones. There's also ones for spouses who has a spouse who's struggling with it. And so that would probably be my first resource. I think also going to your priests, going to your diocese, talking to the family life and seeing what other counselors are available in your area. Because what has to happen is you have to come up with a plan with your spouse of how you're going to deal with this reality. I remember when I first met my husband, we were just starting to possibly think about dating. And he's like, hey, Catherine, I need to know any baggage that might be coming up so that I can deal with it now before I'm emotionally attached. And people laugh, but it's actually the best thing, because then it's just out there. You're not waiting till you drop this thing, right? And so then I kind of told him about some stuff. And then he's like, well, I need to let you know that I struggle with pornography addiction. And, and so we had a conversation of where is it at? What is he doing to manage it? What's going to happen if he's tempted? What happens if he falls? Right. And so we just had a communication about it that allowed us to walk and talk about it throughout our marriage and our relationship. And, how each couple does that is different. But I think it's important to not be afraid of that conversation, to not be afraid that, it's just like any temptation of the devil. If we pretend it's not there, weeds are going to grow all over the place. But if we are intentional and we're dealing with it and we're talking about it, and there's just so many different things out there. If you're looking for help, there's tons in this area today. So to have that communication and to reach out and to realize that this is a struggle that is common, male, female, and we can overcome it with the proper resources.
Okay. Earlier this week, our first presentation to kick off the week was on postpartum depression, really talking about what it is, how it's not just depression. There's many things that can be a part of it. And, so kind of just some basic facts about it, but then also resources, and even just understanding that kind of that postpartum time is a perfect storm of an opportunity for all kinds of things to, struggles to happen. And so, there's understanding the underlying physiological cause, the biological, the hormonal, but then we have to cope with the reality of how I'm feeling during this time. And it's so important for women to know that postpartum depression doesn't happen immediately. It can, but it's not always immediately after a baby's born. It can be a few months after that baby's born. And also, as we talked about infertility and miscarriage a little bit ago, most women who suffer a miscarriage don't realize that postpartum depression can happen to them as well. So what do you do? What are kind of some key priorities that you have for a woman struggling with postpartum depression and her spouse and her family?
Okay, so I have this sticker that I sell, And I feel like every new mom needs this sticker, and it needs it on that water bottle that you get from the hospital. And it's a big circle, and on the top it says, don't be a bully, in very big white writing, right? Because we all agree we shouldn't bully, right? That's like universally accepted. But then smaller, when you look at it a little closer, it says to yourself, right? Because we tend to not say things to ourselves that we would never say to anyone else. And in postpartum depression, like in your earlier presentation, you explained all the reasons why this time is the perfect storm of hard. But what we tend to do, instead of saying, okay, this is hard, what can I do to help make it easier? Like, what resources do I need? Like, can I just order out to eat on a Friday night? Instead, we're like, you're a bad mom because you couldn't even make dinner tonight, right? You look at the laundry and you're like, oh, I should do that laundry. I failed my kids. They have dirty laundry, right? Like, I'm not a good wife to my husband because I don't want him touching me and I don't feel good and I'm uncomfortable. And so when we stop that bullying in its tracks and we are like, no, like this is reasonable and I'm going to love myself through this transition, it completely changes the road, right? Then I'm allowed to say, I'm going to buy the frozen chicken nuggets. I'm not going to make homemade chicken nuggets. Like I'm going to give myself some of those graces to help me through that transition. And then the other thing that I always tell my new moms is that I give them two advice. One, be wary of free advice. And then two, to remember that of all the moms in the world, God picked you to be the mom of this baby. And he knew your strengths, he knew your weaknesses, he knows you and he chose you and he trusts you. So you need to trust you. Right? Because what do new moms get? If you formula feed, your kid will be an idiot. If you don't, if you nurse, your kid will be attached too much and will be an idiot. If you go sleep, they'll die. If you don't go sleep, they'll die. Like, it's just these extremes. And these poor moms are like, I just love my baby and I want to do it right. And those dreaded shoulds come in again. Like, I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I should, right? And they get so lost in all the different things that they feel they should. It's like hard to be in that moment, and it's like feeds and makes that depression worse that's already kind of happening because of the biological changes, right? So if we stop for a minute and we're like, okay, God, the best thing for this baby is what makes mommy happy and what works for our family. And like, where do I feel confident in what you're calling me? You trust me with this baby. Then I can like take a deep breath and I can enjoy, like with my one kid, I like never let her down just because she was my first. And I knew I would never get that ever again, where I could just hold one baby. So we were like, you held her all the time. And I knew in my heart, like, that's what I needed, was to just hold that baby as much as I could. Right. And so when we can start to give ourselves help through that confidence in ourselves as a mother, and like what we know is right for our family and our babies and our bodies, and we communicate that and we allow that support, there's no bullying, it again doesn't make that transition go away, but it makes it easier. Instead of having a car with no shocks and every bounce is really big, it kind of smooths the bounce out a little bit.
Thank you again, Catherine. I guess just kind of in closing, we will, if anyone has any questions, I'll open that up in just a moment. But, we've mentioned a lot of things here in the connections. And, you even mentioned in a couple of the scenarios, like talk to your priest. And I think one of the important things is that all of these issues we're talking about, they're not just a mental issue. They're not just a physical issue. They're not just a history issue. And so when we find ourselves in these circumstances, we aren't just, stuck going down one avenue. We can actually journey and circle around, come back, rework through an issue. We can seek multiple avenues to help us. It's okay to have your practitioner, your doctor, your counselor, and your priest helping you through some of these things. Like you said, it's a net. It's not just your spouse. It's we need to catch all of those things that are happening because we are very complex, right? And so we need to pull in all of those resources to help us. And so that's just kind of one of the good takeaways that I hope everyone has today too, is that there is a lot out there for you. And even if you don't know, kind of know where to go to ask for help and help them, where you can have help building that net, and that a net is necessary, not just one rope to hold on to. So I really just, Catherine, thank you for taking the time to do this today. And if you are out there and you're listening to this and you feel like, wow, I really do have PMS, or you're struggling with infertility, or any of the things that we talked about, for a fertility care perspective, all you need to do is go to salinafertilitycare.org. You will find our website. You'll find all of our practitioners. You can find the ways to contact us, and we'll be there to support you. Catherine, how would someone reach out to you? Maybe they want to, talk about some counseling, or just kind of building that net, and how you might be able to refer for some help on that. How would people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if you're looking for individual counseling, you can contact me at just Google Denuzzo Counseling, denuzzocounseling.com. And so there's a little contact information, and you can just send me a message and I'll contact you. And I do everything virtual because, Kansas is big and rural, and finding counselors is really hard. So I like to be able to use telehealth to help my clients get help wherever they are, or if you're nursing, or if you're, driving, it's just hard to manage kids. So I've had many moms who nurse their new baby while in counseling, or have little faces come up in the sessions, and it's not ideal, obviously, but I don't mind it at all. And so that's one way. But one other thing that I would highly recommend in all of these areas is going to my other website, which is sacredheartmentalwellness.com. And I have my book, the Catholic Guide Through Anxiety. And I also have 2 videos, one is what is mental wellness? And it helps to explain changing this idea of mental health being a bad thing to a positive thing, and what that looks like. Because once you change that view, so many of things change in our mental health. And so it gives lots of examples of how is it when we're kind of stuck in these old patterns, and how it looks if we change them. And then the other video is the biology of anxiety, which is similar to the book, but not everyone wants to read the book. But it is going to help you understand what is happening in my brain when I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling sad or depressed. And then I can better understand it, so I don't have to bully myself. I don't have to be mad. I can see how beautifully made I am. I can see how this is a good, healthy, good response to the wrong stimulus. And so those would be the ways that you could get a hold of me. So Denuzzo Counseling or Sacred Heart Mental Wellness, lots of different resources there to get some help and some first steps.
Very good. All right. Anyone that's on today, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to unmute yourself. If you want to type a question in the chat box, you can do that as well. And then, of course, know that you can reach out to any of us for questions. Catherine, a question is that I have for you, and that I think maybe any other practitioners. You've done some great work for kind of our national and international network of practitioners. Can we use you as a referral source? Since you are virtual, do you see people outside of Kansas? Could your counseling be a place that we could recommend to people?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a complicated question, but I would say you can always contact me, and then we can see from there. Would probably be the easiest answer, is that I'm definitely always here to answer questions, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But reaching out always to see what God's calling us to.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? All righty. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for joining today and this recording. We have recorded today's session. We're going to post it on the diocesan YouTube page. And then there's a playlist for the Natural Family Planning Office. So you could always find it. It'll be on that Salina Fertility Care .org page so that you can always have access. You can use it if you just need to refer it to a friend or a family member and say, hey, I think this might help. That resource will be there. If you're not busy this evening, we'd love to have you join us for our final virtual presentation for the week. It is called Miscarriage and Infant Loss, Practical and Spiritual Support. I will be talking kind of about what to expect if you're having a miscarriage, kind of physically what's going to happen. We're going to have Father Brian Lager talking about spiritually what's available to you, how the church teaching in this area and what the church can do to serve you during this difficult time. And then we're going to have a couple, Samantha and Nathan Baker, will be sharing their experience through a very recent miscarriage that they had, and just kind of sharing that journey, because kind of like we talked before, we don't need to keep this to ourselves. Certainly, we're not going to advertise it for the whole world, but sharing and journeying together through these difficult times is really important and can help each other. So if you're able to join 7 o'clock tonight, same kind of way you found out about this talk, you can find out about that one and join us. Again, Catherine, thank you. Lots of comments in the chat box thanking you for your time today. And just thank you, all of you, for attending and making this a part of your day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to close in a quick prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for the opportunity to come together and talk about this beautiful connection between our reproductive health and our mental health. And we just thank you for the many ways that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We thank you for the gift of our hormones, of our emotions, that while they may be difficult sometimes, they are such a beautiful way that you've made us in your image. And so we thank you for that. And we just ask that this information today may be a resource for those in need, and that those that struggle with any of these issues find a light in their life, and that you put someone in their life, those little Jesuses that Catherine mentioned, to help them and to guide them. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.